what time it is? It's time for another episode of
Paranormal.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen. It is that time, and yes, I know I keep getting asked that question. Did Dan Aykroyd actually do that for us? Yes, he did. He was actually up here at South by Southwest in San Antonio, Texas. Well, and it was in Austin, where South by Southwest. But we got the chance to go get it from him, and he was really awesome about it. And for those who don't know, he actually works with MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. So he is big on paranormal. And if you don't know, also, he does have his own brand of spirits out, so to say. So you can go look that up. But tonight we are continuing a discussion. Now, last week we had the skeptic in here, and we did do some questions with that. But tonight I'm breaking out all the stops. You know, we're going straight to get the answers, and I am bringing in a very special gentleman from across the globe, believe it or not, who has been really kind to join us. And not only, because I know a lot of people said, oh, it's just going to be recorded. He did one step better, folks. He is here with me live right now, and that is Mr. Colin McLaren.
How are you, EW?
Doing wonderful, and you?
Yeah, pretty good, thank you.
Now I want to get a little bit of background for everyone on who you are. Now, I went from the documentary that, you know, and explained, and I know I've been online, I've done all that research, but it sounds better when it comes from the person themselves. And of course, in the documentary, it talks about how you took down 5 of the, mafia bosses. But you've been in the industry, in the detective industry, for quite some time.
Yes, I first started off as a rookie policeman and graduated to be a detective. This is all way back in the 1980s. And throughout the hard times of the 80s, I think globally was probably the toughest, and 1990s the toughest period to be a detective or law enforcement officer anywhere in the world. And then Australia is a very big country, and we have just the same sort of problems as you do throughout America. So I've had a long association with law enforcement, and principally as a team leader or detective sergeant.
Right, which is really cool. And then, of course, obviously, the law inside and out, and so it makes it easier. But I think probably what helps a lot with what you do, or what you've done for what we're going to talk about tonight, is that you really know how to dig in and look for answers where a lot of people might not even think to go.
Yeah, most of my career has been in homicides, murder investigations, or child rapes, some really serious national crimes here in Australia, and the mafia investigations, of course, I'm probably most known for 3 years of supposedly bringing down the mafia in one major 3-year investigation. But as a detective, I guess I'm a practitioner, and I used to lecture as a detective as well at the detective training school, the new rookies and the new guys coming through. So it's my bent, I guess. It's what I've done, is focus on crime scenes, cold case studies, and investigations. Right.
Which brings us to what we're discussing tonight, and it's a 50-year mystery that's... Now, and I've got to say, and I know you probably have heard many different things. I'm sure you've heard all kinds of feedback from your investigation and so forth. But there's still people who, I guess, if they hear the truth, they don't want to believe.
I guess there's another way of saying it too. And someone recently said this to me, and I'll use their words because it's spot on. Sometimes the truth isn't sexy enough. And that's a fact, you know. Detectives are confronted with this time and time again. And when you're, I guess, giving evidence in court, Supreme Court or a county court, in front of a trial and a jury, you know, sometimes the basic truth is just not sexy enough. But of course, you can't jazz it up. You can't exaggerate it. You have to just be factual. And sometimes as people want sort of a Hollywood-style conspiracy theory, to play the role or to be the answer. And when you say it's simply not, it's a straightforward case of this and this and this, and the outcome is simple, they get a little bit sort of disappointed.
Yeah. One of the things, and of course we're doing this on a show, because I could have done this. I have a show that I do where I do different interviews of different individuals, but we're doing this one on a show called Pairanormal. And one of the things that people look at it is that it's like one of the most controversial things out there. There's so much. I don't know how to put it in the right words at the moment because I got so many running through my head. But I mean, we've got the government conspiracies, we've got mafia conspiracies. What was the other one?
Fidel Castro in Cuba.
Yeah, that one. I mean, it's just like there were so many different areas that people just want to say this is how it happened. And I think for me, the way I've always looked at paranormal is if they ever did bring out the truth, of whatever event, like, oh my God, ghosts do actually exist, people are going to say, well, I see it, but I don't believe it.
That's right. Yeah, and there's been so many, with JFK's death, so many weird and wacky theories levelled at it, and some very sensible ones. It might have been, for example, it could have been an attempt by the Russian government to pay back the U.S. administration and JFK personally, because if you look at the backdrop of that era, that 1963, JFK had been victorious, been very strong against the Russians with the Bay of Pigs issue, the invasion down there in Cuba, and just after that, more importantly, the missiles of October, when Khrushchev had all the missiles lined up in Cuba ready to fire them off into USA. And because of JFK and his brother and the strong administration, they were victorious, and the world just, I thought, was in awe of this administration. And then, of course, sometime just after, JFK's assassinated, murdered, and of course it becomes logical that it could have been Russia, but it simply wasn't.
Right. Well, I mean, it just would make sense that it wasn't exactly. I think for me, the obvious wasn't at the time wasn't obvious, as we would say. Like if they were the mafia or Russia or that would just be too simple. That would have been too simple. But the fact is that it is something else. And I got to say, after watching the documentary, my jaw hit the ground. I was blown away. I was like, oh, my God, that makes so sense. How could we have missed that? So, and we'll get into that. But there is one burning question that I would love to ask, and we get this chance to now. What got you interested in trying to solve the answer?
I had a long career, as I said earlier, with a lot of homicides, a lot of really bad murder investigations, and I guess when you're playing on that field, on that level, as a detective, you obviously take an interest in other sort of serious crimes on that level, and JFK is certainly a very serious murder. It's an assassination and all this, but if you just break it down to what it is, it's a very serious murder or killing of a very important person. And any detective who's done those sorts of cases naturally lends his thoughts and ideas and to it and thinks about it perhaps more than most people. And along the way, as all these sort of solutions and conspiracy theories unfolded over the years and decades, I used to sort of put them into my thinking and try to work out, is this feasible? Is this possible? And work through it. And, of course, each time I came up with a zero, and that's just the detective in me. But along the way, I was just really wanted to one day have a go at it. One day to sit down, if I ever found 4 or 5 years where I was doing nothing, and I had to wait till I resigned, of course, and retired from being a detective. And I had the time, I had the opportunity, and I had the skills to sit down for 4.5 years. And I sort of thought, okay, I can get all the documents, all the statements, all the testimonies, all the evidence, all the exhibits, and I can get them in my lounge room, and I can go through them on my computer, my database, and there's thousands and thousands of pages, and I spent 4.5 years reading everything, and I was determined to have a go and to find an outcome.
Now, see, this leaves me to a question, two questions at the point, and I didn't think of them until now because it didn't make, again, like I said, there's just so many questions that lie within this that everybody, they got to know. But we know that the Warren Commission or Warren investigation, that was huge. The paperwork in that is just probably would take years to go through on its own.
Yes.
So what are the files that are supposedly sealed that they don't want to open?
Well, until the Clinton administration, so if you look at the 60s and 70s, all the way through to the mid-90s, all of the evidence, all of the documents and testimonies and sworn statements and affidavits were all sealed under the secrecy provisions to do with JFK, and that's okay. That happens, and it certainly doesn't happen as much now, but it used to happen in that old-fashioned time of the 1960s. They would seal things, and they were supposed to be sealed for 75 years. So in other words, anybody who was around back then was certainly going to be dead by the time the seal was cut.
Right.
But Bill Clinton, was a little bit more modern, and he was reacting to, I guess, the American people's annoyance about this old-fashioned rule, because they all wanted answers, they wanted information, they wanted the freedom of information. So rightfully, Clinton decided to pass legislation through your Congress, and they unsealed all of those documents. So, but it took 4 or 5 years for all those documents to be assessed, accredited, checked, verified, and then released to the public. So now you're talking, in year 2000, 2002, and 2004, and then it's got to find PDF. It's got to be condensed into PDF, so we can all get access to this now wonderful information, and that's got to be then libraried and all sorts of issues there for a few more years. And then along comes me, and I sit down and turn my computer on, and all the information is now there. There's no more information that is held secret. It's all out there, and it's all freedom of information.
Wow. Okay. And it always makes me wonder because, you hear again that they're like, oh, they're sealed again. They're not. I think it's, another 50 years?
Oh, there is, I think, of the total amount, EW, I think 3 or 4% of information is still sealed. I just said that it's all out there, but 96 or 97% is all out there. And let me tell you, I've read every document. It took me 4.5 years. I don't know how many millions of words, but certainly there is over 10,000 pages I've read. I can verify to your listeners it's all out there. There's no skullduggery. What they've kept back, that little few percent, is to do with the broader look at his autopsy and, the shocking photos of JFK's body that was blown apart and all of those sorts of gory details. They've held that back for another 6 years, and I think that's probably okay. It didn't worry me as a detective because I'd found out the reasons for the killing anyway, and it wasn't reliant on that sort of evidence. It was reliant on the evidence of the crime scene itself, the Dealey Plaza at the school book depository.
Right, and then, well, we'll get to that. I'm so eager to get to the end already, but we can't go there yet. There's so much that we got to go through. Now, there's evidence that, as a detective, and of course, I can't say I'm a detective, but I do like to write, murder mysteries and stuff, and so I know the evidence is what is always followed, and it can't lie. The evidence can't lie.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Okay, so we've got some bits and pieces of evidence that right now are never even looked at. And the Warren Commission didn't investigate it. There's eyewitnesses that testify to it, but the one that stood out the most right now is the possibility, that there was gun smoke smelled right down on the ground level.
That's probably the most telling piece of evidence that was completely ignored, pushed aside, even though the Warren Commission knew about it, they didn't want to know about it. When you fire a weapon, and let's just say we're talking about a high-powered rifle, well, in fact, any weapon, but certainly a high-powered rifle, what will happen is there'll be a mist, or gunshot residue, detectives call it, and forensic people call it, and just imagine there's a mist. If the listeners can imagine spraying a can of hairspray, or spraying a can of room freshener, that's exactly what we're dealing about. There's a little 1 or 2 meters, or a bubble, or a circle around that rifle of about 1 or 2 yards.
Right.
That's called gunshot residue. That will settle. It'll settle on clothes. It'll settle on cars. It'll settle on anything at all. If you're in a room, it'll settle on the lounge suite. So, of course, you test the lounge suite for the gunshot residue. That's very scientific. Or you test the shooter's clothes and hands, and that indicates to a jury, and proves to a jury that he either held the gun or fired the gun. And it's all these sorts of issues. Now, back in 1963, no one bothered with gunshot residue. They all knew about it. It was used in trials. It was used with the FBI, etc. But no one bothered about it in Dallas, Texas. They just let it go until he forgot about it. So you're reliant on the witnesses. And I found altogether 14 different witnesses that were at street level who saw gun smoke, and another 7 or 8 of them that were at street level that smelled gun smoke. So around about 20 different witnesses were around JFK's car, around the Secret Service follow-up car just behind, that saw and smelled gunshot residue, or smoke, as they called it, some of them. Some of them called it gunshot residue. Those people were completely ignored in the Warren Commission, and they shouldn't have been, because Lee Harvey Oswald, you've got to remember, Lee Harvey Oswald, who was blamed as the lone shooter,
right?
He was six stories up in a building, some 85, 90 yards behind the JFK's car, 6 stories up, and Lee Harvey Oswald was certainly in that book depository, certainly had a gun, and certainly was firing his own gun, but the wind was blowing in his face, so therefore his gunshot residue, or his smoke, could not possibly, it's an impossibility, could have got down 6 levels and hung around the Secret Service car, which was immediately behind JFK's limousine. A complete impossibility. So as a detective, I had alarm bells after alarm bells ringing. What's going on? Something's happened. Some gun has been discharged on the ground at street level, as well as Lee Harvey Oswald's way up on the 6th floor.
Well, there was another bit of that, is that even, I think you even mentioned it in a documentary as well, wasn't the motorcade already at 11 miles an hour moving away? So obviously that's still a great enough speed that should the gunshot smoke or smell be anywhere close, they're moving away from it, so that wind would be blowing in towards them, so there would be no way that could still work that way either.
That's correct. A complete impossibility, and it's not even open to conjecture. It's something that just couldn't happen, and I don't think there's a forensic scientist or detective anywhere in the world that would differ from that. So you've got a real interesting thing happening as you read through the 10,000 pages of now this information that is freely available, that keeps reoccurring time and time again. So then you start thinking, why wasn't that evidence given to the Warren Commission? And then you delve deeper, and then you find out that people signed the affidavits. They certainly signed their testimony, gave it to the Dallas police, and gave it to the Dallas Sheriff's Office, and even to some FBI people who were running around the crime scene. But they were never invited to give that evidence or encouraged to give it at the important inquiry which was known as the Warren Commission.
Right, and again, I know, like, per the evidence that was given, 10 people witnessed the smell of powder, plus a police officer.
Oh, but just to look at who was smelling this, because they could all have been stupid, they could have all been fools, they could have been all naive, so inexperienced. But what we have, when we look at the professional background of the individuals that were smelling this gun smoke and seeing this gun smoke, one of them was a U.S. Senator, Senator Ralph Yarborough. Mm-hmm. He had 50 years' experience with firearms, and he had a long career as a Marine, U.S. Marines. So that man is an expert with guns. Then we have another expert hunter, a press man. He was taking photos, and he had been hunting all of his life. Right. Then his partner, another fellow alongside him, was again an expert hunter. Then a policeman. Then two other policemen on motorbikes saw gun smoke. And then you've got country people and country folks that are used to handling rifles. So all of a sudden you've got a group of witnesses that almost, you could say, are expert in guns and gunpowder. Mm-hmm. They're not fools. They're not naive, and so they become a very valuable critical mass of witnesses.
Right. Well, and our chat room's lighting up right now. So I've got one gentleman who's a big time fanatic with guns, so he knows his guns really well. And of course, he made a comment earlier, and we'll get into where the experts, some of these experts who mentioned it. But he did make a comment earlier that Oswald couldn't have shot made the shots with a Carcano. I hope I say the gun right.
That's right.
Now, we do know that at least one of the shots was from that rifle.
Yes, and as a detective, I believe quite clearly that 2 shots were fired by Lee Harvey Oswald's Carcano rifle. It was an old World War II Italian-made piece of junk, really, and they were a army surplus weapon that were dumped on the U.S. market just after the Second World War, and they were bolt action, very heavy timber stock, and a cumbersome sort of a weapon. But nonetheless, he got 2 shots away with that firearm, and I believe the first missed outright and was a ricochet. Hit the ground because his sights were out, and it was proved fairly significantly that his sights were faulty. Mm-hmm. And the second shot that Lee got away hit JFK in the back of the neck, the neck muscle there, where it just sort of meets with the vertebrae area, and went cleanly through the neck. There's no dispute on this, and it comes out of his voice box, and it's neat as a pin, which is consistent with the type of ammo that Lee was using, which was 4 metal jacket rounds, which are designed to go neatly and cleanly through the body of a soldier, or in this case, JFK, and then it passed through Governor Connolly as well. So he got 2 shots away.
Right. Now, I'm not going to have you explain this, and there's a reason why. Folks, you need to get the DVD or go and... I know right now, currently, it's on Netflix, so if you're a subscriber to Netflix, you can go see it there. It's called JFK, The Smoking Gun. In here, in this video... in this documentary, the explanation of the shot that goes through Kennedy into Connolly, which is considered for years the mysterious bullet. Yeah, I still have to laugh at that. But you actually clear that whole thing up in just that portion. And this is not, I mean, radio is a great place to do the talking, but this is a visual effect that people have to see to understand. When I saw this, I'm telling you, it was like, oh my God, lights turned on. I could see, it made perfect sense. Mm-hmm. So I encourage everybody to get it. Now, you also have a book out, but it's in ebook form, right?
Ebook, yes, JFK The Smoking Gun is an ebook, and it's also, of course, as a documentary, the DVD documentary on the shelves in your audiovisual stores.
Right. So everybody's got to go get that because it really is worth it. I I mean, that's what really got me to finalize. I think I've been talking about doing a show on this for years. I know for at least the last 5 years I've been saying we're going to do a JFK special. But tonight we're doing it, and your documentary actually got me stoked. I mean, I saw things in there that made perfect sense. I mean,
it follows the rules of evidence, EW. It's not about theories and making wild statements that are without fact. It follows quite seriously the rules of evidence. Mm-hmm. So it has a very, very defined parameters that we worked within to study all the evidence. And we're happy it'll withstand any criticism. And it's been out in the open now 6 or 7 months, since November last year. And we've had law enforcement officers from around the world. We've had detectives, investigators, even a few judges. I've had all sorts of comments, hundreds of emails, all congratulating myself and the research team for finally getting it right. So rules of evidence are important, and that's their basis.
All right, right. So here's what I am going to do. Now, you explained that the bullet used. Well, let's back up a second. There is a piece of evidence we have to clear up here. In this, a lot of people mentioned that there was 3 casings found where Oswald was. Could you explain why it's not that he took 3 shots?
Sure. When you look at the evidence and everything beforehand, you have Lee Harvey Oswald practicing constantly. He was going out into the field. In fact, it was Love Field Airport. He was going out in the back fields of that area, and he was doing target shooting and practicing. And he was hiding his gun. He was burying the gun in the soil. So if you look at it from a Marine's point of view, because he's an ex-Marine, a poor shot, there's nothing remarkable about him, but nonetheless he was an ex-Marine and he had some firearm skills. Out every night in the cold and burying his gun, hiding it in the dirt. So that is quite normal, and certainly not abnormal for a hunter or even a Marine in those sorts of combat or guerrilla conditions, I guess, that you would use a plug, that is a spent round, a spent casing, an empty casing that has been fired. You keep it in the chamber, mm-hmm. and then you put the bolt down, and then of course you'd wrap the gun up because you could get wet and rusted. So what the spent casing does is stops grit, stops dirt, and any sort of moisture getting into the very important chamber of the weapon. And that's where we see the 3 spent casings at the crime scene at the book depository. The first one, which is a distance away from another 2, and the other 2 were grouped close together. The first one is dented, and I say is the plug, because if it was dented, it wouldn't have been able to eject in a normal firing close working of the rifle. If you're just firing it one round after the other, it would have jammed. So that seems to be the plug that he's used when he's freed the gun up. He's then loaded it and aimed and fired 2 rounds, and that's where the 2 have grouped together at the floor just near the window.
Now, we do got to mention there's 2 other people who've talked about this as well. Now, there was a ballistics expert who started this, I guess, dedicated his career and everything to get an answer on this, and that was Howard Donahue.
Howard Donahue was an extraordinarily talented ballistics man, probably in his time, in the 1960s and 70s, and even during the 1980s, he was probably America's best ballistics man. He was giving evidence in courts. He was very forensic. He had his own laboratory and gun shop, and he was in Maryland, which I don't know where that is. I think it's somewhere over near New Jersey. And he was working with police departments and courts, and he was clearly a high-level ballistics man. And he did an extraordinary amount of work for 25 years, and he came up with a similar position on that spent casing and also on the positioning of the vehicle and the seats within the vehicle the JFK's vehicle and to do with the magic bullet theory. And he was ignored by the Warren Commission. He went out of his way to be heard at the Warren Commission, and they just shunned him. An extraordinary American and a great expert.
And that's the thing about the investigation, the Warren Group, that I still don't understand. I mean, there was a lot of evidence that should have been investigated.
Yes.
Should have been looked at. There was people who didn't even get interviewed. I mean, that blows me away. So we'll get, I guess. There's not enough time to really get into everything, but we're going to do what we can here. Now, another gentleman did do a book as well, which was called Mortal Error. The shot that killed JFK was done by Bonner Menninger.
He's a journalist who wrote the story of that wonderful gunsmith and ballistics expert we just talked about, Howard Donahue. And there was always going to be a story about this man trying his best and solving certain aspects of the shooting and trying to tell the Warren Commission and trying to tell the House of the Select Committee into assassinations. And that story is a fascinating story, and Bonner Menninger puts that into a book. It's almost a biography of Howard Donahue.
And I do want to mention those because you actually mentioned them in the documentary as well.
Yes.
So
and they should always be mentioned. Great people, and I got to know Bonner very, very well. He's a great journalist, and he wrote a fantastic book. The trouble is, when it came out, and this is the quirk of it all, when it came out, it was the same time as Oliver Stone's movie JFK came out.
Oh, okay.
And that took all the oxygen. That took all of the, all of the, I guess, media just flocked around good old Oliver Stone and the movie. And of course, it went on a year later to win the Academy Award. But poor old, it's all to do with timing, I guess, EW in the media, and you'd know about that. But it's everything about sort of trying to work out when you're going to release it. And they released it at the same time, the same instant that JFK, the film was, and of course no one wanted to know this theory, this very technical book, and it is a tad too technical, beautifully constructed that, and so it found I guess the second bookshelves within weeks, and they were very, very sad. But I happened to be in New York at the time, and I was lucky to get a copy way back then in 1992, and I read it, and it's just a wonderful document.
I'm actually gonna be getting my hands on both because I gotta have them. I mean, the details we're about to discuss, and the reason I'm mentioning the ballistic experts too, is because the details that were in there was the one little piece of evidence that changes everything.
Yes.
And that is the entry wound to the head.
Yes. Of course, if you look at all the conspiracy theorists, a great many of them will say that headshot wound originated from the grassy knoll. So therefore, it was a shot from the front of JFK, hit him in the front of the head and blew out the back of his head. And that's pretty logical, there's a detective, there's nothing wrong with that, of course, as long as the evidence is there. So you start looking at all of the different news footages and all the different amateur footage, and I think there was something like 28 people with cameras there that day.
Yeah.
So you start going through all of those, that collection, and of course you start then looking at bullet performance and what bullets would normally do, and all of a sudden the grassy knoll shooter becomes a nonsense. Clearly the shots come from behind.
Right.
And we'll discuss that in a few minutes' time, I guess. Stuff we're holding back for the end of this hour. But when you look at it, it is a classic reaction of a bullet that's come from behind, and it's hit the head and caused that jolt. And of course, the jolt makes it look as if it's blowing out from the back, and that's wrong. Interestingly, if you look at Orville Nix's famous footage, It's been cleaned up recently. There was a grant supplied to digitalise these films and clean up all the dark shadows from the 1960s in that sort of early day of amateur home sort of films. And you'll see in the original Orville Nix, he's face on to JFK's car as it crosses the screen, and behind, in the background, you can see the shadows of the trees at the grassy knoll, and they're very dark shadows. And of course, that the conspiracy theorists said, "Oh, there you go, someone's hiding in the dark shadows." Well, the new digitally enhanced and cleaned up version of Orville Nix's footage shows those shadows have all gone, all been cleaned up, and you can see clearly underneath, and there is no shooter, there is no gun, and of course the conspiracy theory of a forward shot is blown out the water.
Right. Well, not only that, but even going by, ballistics and bullets and so forth, let's just toy with this a moment. If there was a shot from the front that's and we're talking about the fatal headshot, and we see the even in the Zapruder film, I just don't want to be as graphic, but I guess I got no choice. The explosion of the head, there would be no exit wound from behind because of that explosion.
That's right.
So the forensic evidence actually shows that there was an entry wound from behind and at a different angle, which is a key fact here, but it was smaller. What was the size difference between the two?
That's right. This is probably the most important piece of forensics to do with JFK's skull. The listeners should know that at the back of JFK's skull, and if the listeners were able to put their own hand at the back of their own head, they'll find there's that little bump in the back, in the middle of the back. Well, just to one side of that little bump, there was a hole, a very clean, neat bullet hole, and this was all part of the autopsy, and we delved into this, and when I was researching, I found more and more evidence about it, evidence that was totally ignored at the Warren Commission. That hole measured 6 millimetres in diameter. Now, that means, to the layperson, what that means is, that means that the bullet that enters that hole or causes that hole has to be 6 millimetres or less. Do you understand what I'm saying? In diameter.
Yes.
Because obviously it's got to be less because it's got to be, be able to pass through that same hole. Now, the bullet that Lee Harvey Oswald was firing, he was firing full metal jacket rounds, and they have a diameter of 6.5 millimetres.
Which is half is still a big difference.
It's a huge difference. And then what we do on the documentary, and we discuss it in the book as well, is we actually put a typical bullet of, say, 5.5 millimetres, a smaller bullet, into that hole, and it fits perfectly, and it goes through without fuss. And we tried the bullet of Lee Harvey Oswald at 6.5 millimetres, and it just jams in. It can't get past the nose of it, and it's impossible for it to go through that hole. So it's pretty basic stuff. The forensics finishes, and then I guess the deduction is pretty obvious that Lee Harvey Oswald's bullets couldn't have caused that 6 millimetre hole.
Right, and our gun expert in the chat room is actually saying it was a 5.56 millimeter entry.
That's right.
And as you said, there's no way the bullet from Oswald's gun could be, do that. Now, there was one other thing about this that I want to mention too. The casings that, the bullets, I guess, as you mentioned earlier, they were full metal jacket casings. Can they explode on an entry? They're designed by way of the Geneva Convention rules, and they're designed for warfare, the full metal jacket rounds. So we were talking about ballistics and armory design, and it's a very precise science. It's a very precise piece of engineering, and these bullets are designed to pass neatly and cleanly through their target, which is, in this case, human being.
And of course, we've seen that thousands and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of times in warfare. Soldiers will get shot by a 4-metal jacket round and it'll pass neatly through the body. The reason for that, EW, and the listeners, is important. The 4-metal jacket round was designed to do that so the soldiers would be shot, but not necessarily massacred or killed, and they would be sent home. It's another casualty, and of course, the Allies or the people who's firing each other are then busy patching up soldiers and sending them home and all the time and effort. But the Geneva Convention thought that was the fairest way to do it. Now, that's not the case with the shot that hit JFK in the back of the head. Mm-hmm. That's a bullet that measures less than 6 millimeters, clearly, because the bone, the skull, measurement is 6 millimeters, the hole left behind. And, of course, when it went into the skull, inches into the skull, it blew itself up. It exploded violently upon impact. And that is called a frangible round designed to explode upon impact. That is not the performance of a 4-metal jacket round. That's the performance of a hollow point.
Right.
And a hollow point is a devastating round, should never be used in warfare. Sadly, these days, those rules have changed in the modern era, but the old-fashioned, 100 years before, say the 1980s, when there was some sort of ridiculous, but some sort of a fairness in war, those rounds were totally forbidden because they would blow the soldier to pieces. And that's what happens with JFK's skull. It's blown upon entry of the bullet.
Now let me ask you, and this is I'm going to say the words, the damning evidence. What kind of weapon could fire such a bullet?
Well, certainly an AR-15 rifle. AR-15 rifle was state-of-the-art back then. It was a Colt, and it had been tried, and it had been around for a few years back then. It was in the hands of the Secret Service agency. It was their brand new weapon. Mm-hmm. And in fact, that day, the first time the AR-15 rifle was used or was deployed in the arsenal or in the team of Secret Service agents was on that day. That's the first time they ever used it. Strangely, the next day they retired it. They never used that weapon again. So it's very telling as to that sort of a weapon, AR-15 rifle. It uses bullets that are, like the gentleman said who rang you before, 5.56 millimeters in diameter.
Right.
And the bullets are 4-metal jacket rounds designed to explode upon impact. And that's exactly the weaponry used by the Secret Service that day. For the first time and only time, they retired it straight after. Why? And of course, the head of the Secret Service agency, he was called into this Warren Commission, and Mr. Warren himself, Judge Warren himself, was onto it. Mm-hmm. Even though all the other evidence was ignored by the lower counsel, the lower lawyers looking after the Warren Commission, the old fellow, Mr. Warren himself, seemed to be onto it, and he asked the head of the Secret Service, why is it, now what guns did you have? And he denied having any other guns other than handguns, and Warren said, no, you had an AR-15. He said, oh yes, we had that, and we only had it for one day, and we retired it. So that gun was in that follow-up car behind JFK that day.
Now, here's the extra part about it that's a lot, and we're going to say who had this gun during this time and so forth, but this gun was not just witnessed during the motorcade, it was also witnessed after the motorcade, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It's photographed, and the listeners should understand this is not just conjecture, this is absolute hard fact. We have many, many statements, testimony, and sworn affidavits of witnesses seeing that firearm, seeing it in the hands of a Secret Service agent at the time of the third and final shot, the headshot to JFK, and we have it photographed by different people. Mm-hmm. And we also know, and through affidavits, that at the Parkland Hospital, minutes later, the gun was also there as well, and it was bandied around. And then it was after that it disappeared forever,
Right.
and no one's seen it since.
So we are going to mention who had that gun, but there's some more things that I want to kind of get in there real quick. Some questions that still arise. Now, we understand in Texas, or apparently in Dallas, when there's a homicide, they have to perform their own autopsy.
That's correct.
And they did not get to. Not only did they not get to, thus breaking the law, they were both threatened verbally and physically.
Yes. The rules of on autopsy worldwide, I don't know of anywhere in the world this isn't the case, is that the autopsy must take place in the precinct or the jurisdiction of the murder or the foul play that's under investigation. So therefore, it's right in saying that in Dallas, Dr. Rose, who was the head coroner, it was his job to perform the autopsy on JFK.
Right.
And it's extraordinary. I've never heard of it, and I don't think any detective listening to this would have ever heard of it, that a body gets taken to another jurisdiction, thousands of miles away. It just doesn't happen. But that's what happened with JFK. Dr. Rose was very keen to get on with the autopsy, and he was refused to be able to do his autopsy. He cited all of the laws, and he got a judge to try and stop the Secret Service agents taking the body of JFK. And in the end, guns were produced, aggravation and violence was threatened, and in the end, Mr. Rose, good Dr. Rose, was pushed aside. All of the other doctors were pushed aside, and the body was snatched and taken from the hospital at Parkland to Air Force One, and was put on the presidential flight and flown to Washington without autopsy.
Man, that's sad. And then there's a lot of stuff about the autopsy, which, I mean, there's a lot of information we can still go over, and we're not going to have enough time. So, yes, folks, if you want to know more, you have to go check out the documentary, which is JFK, The Smoking Gun, and you can get the ebook, now as well. So you got to do that, but don't forget to also get the others that we mentioned earlier from Bonner Menninger. But let's get to the I guess this is it. This is that moment everybody's been waiting for. Who was holding the AR-15? And that at this point is the gun in question of the shot, because that is the only gun in the area that could have taken the shot.
Yeah, that's a very important point. My investigation went through every skerrick of evidence, and there was no other weapon, long-arm weapon, in that vicinity other than this AR-15 rifle, and except, of course, Lee Harvey Oswald's gun, which was up on the 6th floor.
Right.
The AR-15 rifle was in the hands of a man who was a driver. He was a chauffeur. He was assigned to the Secret Service garage to wash and polish the cars, change the oil and prepare the cars. He was not a Secret Service agent.
Right.
He was not a Secret Service field agent. As a driver, it was his job to move the cars around the country as the President and the Secret Service needed the cars, the limousines, and to prepare them and polish them. But that day, for the first time ever, this driver found himself holding the AR-15 rifle and found himself in a sniper position of the follow-up car behind JFK, and then all of a sudden the shots were fired by Lee Harvey Oswald, and this driver, whose name is George Hickey, reacted properly as best he could for a man who's grossly underqualified, and he reached down on the floor of the open car, the convertible follow-up car, grabbed the AR-15. He went to react, and when he pulled the gun up, he didn't, obviously through lack of experience, didn't know exactly how to handle it properly. It accidentally mischarged, and in that circumstance, he killed JFK. The bullet hit JFK in the back of the head. JFK was only yards in front of him, and in the presidential limousine, and that shot blew JFK's brain.
I'm going to come to, I guess, the one question that everybody would ask. I mean, I know it was my question. It's been a lot of other people's questions that I've heard in the past. Why would they hide that?
You've got to ask two questions, I think. And why does a driver, and not a highly qualified, experienced Secret Service agent, why does a driver have hold of this powerful weapon, as well as your question? The night before, in fact, it was the morning of, but the start of the night before, that they were all in town and JFK had gone to bed, and the Secret Service agents, there's a whole group of them, 13 or 14 of them, decided to knock off and go out drinking. And of course that's totally forbidden. It's the absolute taboo for Secret Service agents to be drinking and socialising when on the presidential detail. But they put JFK to bed just before midnight and then hit a couple of bars, and we've got statements after testimony after affidavits that they were drinking in the Fort Worth Press Bar. They were then asked to leave around about 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. They were drinking scotch and beer. And then they moved on to what was then, way back in the 1960s, called the Beatnik Bar. Beatnik just sort of means like a jazz club.
Right.
And they went to this Beatnik Bar, which that's what it's called, and they were drinking there as well, and they continued partying and drinking, and there were strippers in the Beatnik Bar. Women, obviously, back then they called them scantily clad women, but they said in testimony that they were strippers. And so all of the Secret Service agents were partying on throughout till the wee hours till 5 a.m.
Right.
Then they went back to bed for a 7 a.m. start for the morning parade. So they were obviously hungover, obviously tired, and obviously slow off the mark. And if you look at the black and white footage of that parade, you'll see them all with Ray-Ban wraparound sunglasses, which is not what you should be wearing when you're looking and scanning the crowd and scanning the buildings to snipers. And they were short of men. They had a great shortage of manpower, and some of them were told to knock off before JFK drove into Dallas. There was squabbling and arguing, and lo and behold, because they were so short of men, the driver, who should have been back at the airport after polishing the car, was given the AR-15 rifle, given the job to step up and be sniper, really behind, 5 to 6 metres behind JFK in the follow-up car, and he did the best he could, but he created a mortal error, and he accidentally reached for the rifle and accidentally shot JFK in the back of the head.
I mean, an accident, and I don't understand how. I mean, accidents happen. Why cover it up? That's the part. I'll never understand this question. Why cover it up?
I do understand. I laboured with it for a year or two when I was writing my book and when we were making the documentary. But then I sort of come to peace with this question. It was a time of propaganda. It was a time of the Cold War. And of course, the Russians that we mentioned earlier on your show, that how the Russians had taken on JFK and the American people and the administration with the missiles of October. Right. And everything was a bit sort of cloak and dagger and Cold War and propaganda. And all of a sudden, accidentally, JFK is shot by one of the Secret Service staff, the driver. And that would have made, I guess, America, it would have made the administration the laughing stock of the world. And I'm sure Khrushchev and Fidel Castro would have made sure of that. And I come to understand it more when I took that sort of position and studied it and looked at the times, and certainly they would have been a laughing stock, and I don't think that was deserved by an otherwise wonderful president and the administration, and certainly the American people didn't deserve that sort of a slight, because I think Khrushchev and Fidel Castro would have just milked it for everything it was worth, right, and embarrassed America globally.
Here, a question just came in. I actually got texted this one. Did LBJ have anything to do with the Secret Service going out?
Going out?
Yeah, as far as like their party that night.
No, he didn't. Quite often, LBJ is labelled as one of the conspiracy possibilities that he was behind the killing, and I've read a lot of material and read a lot of books on that too in the research phase, and I couldn't find anything. I found LBJ an odd sort of an individual. You know, he wasn't charismatic like JFK. He was a very sort of a tense individual, and I was very interested in delving as much as I could to find if there was any skeletons there, whether he was involved or not. And I have to say he certainly wasn't, and there was no evidence of any kind. So I think it's just his personality and it's just his sort of character that makes people suspicious of him, but there isn't anything sinister with LBJ, and he wasn't out partying with the men.
Wow. Well, I don't know if you felt it. I know I did. This massive intake of air when we gave the answer, a lot of people just were in shock.
Well, it is. Sometimes, the simplest answer is just accidental, and but of course you've got to look at all of the elements that roll together. And this is a classic example of, I guess, of a whole series of incidents and positions that just work together to the final conclusion, which is just an accident. But this accident would never have happened if the Secret Service men, were never out drinking all night long and partying with strippers. That's the catalyst for causing the accident. Of course, we wouldn't be talking about any of this today, EW, if the Warren Commission did their job properly, but of course there was elements in the Warren Commission and the government that didn't want this to come out. Mm-hmm. So of course they did everything they can to keep all those smoke witnesses we talked about, the people that smelled gun smoke around JFK's car, around the Secret Service follow-up car. They kept these important witnesses out of the testimony, out of the commission. And the same with the autopsy. The evidence is overwhelming in the autopsy that it was a rear headshot, and it was caused by a bullet that could only have been fired by the Secret Service. And of course, if you delve into my book or the document, you'll get a bit of a taste for some of the skullduggery in the autopsy as well. So none of this would have ever happened. Of course, we wouldn't be talking about it if people did their jobs properly and didn't go into damage control.
Right. No, I agree with you. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. Hopefully I didn't ask any of the wrong questions.
You did very well. I'm very pleased with the interview, and thank you very much for all your listeners for taking the time, because it is an hour's lecture, I guess, but we all base it on the rules of evidence, and this is the facts, and there's no sort of trendy conspiracy theories here.
Yes, well, definitely, and I mean, this is a chance for you guys. You can still draw your own conclusion, but this, as Colin just said, this is based off of facts. This is based off of evidence that is available for you guys to find. So it's out there, and again, it's you believe or you don't believe, but I'm definitely I've won to this fact. I understand it. And I got to say, the documentary made it very clear. I could not go any direction after that. So, JFK, the smoking gun, available right now on Netflix. You can also get it to purchase on your own from, probably best place is Amazon right now, but also get the ebook. Get the ebook. You got to have the ebook.
It's the documentary's up for an Emmy.
Oh, okay, cool.
So people are taking it seriously, and the documentary in Australia just recently was awarded by the Australian media, and they're pretty tough like you guys, the best international documentary of the year.
Oh, definitely.
So it's getting awards, globally. So, but it was nice to be a part of it.
Well, it was nice to have you on, and so gracious to join us. And I definitely welcome you back anytime. Anytime you want to discuss more, we will do that. But again, I do want to thank you, and I know I said an hour, so I got to let you go.
Yeah, no worries, and thank you to the American people too. I did a lot of media over there over the last 6 or 7 months, 160 interviews or something when I travelled throughout America, and you've got some wonderful people. So thank you to all of the listeners.
Oh, thank you.
So all the best.
You have a good one, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Ciao. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it. There's the answer. So, and I know we're going over a little bit. Forgive me. Nina Khan is coming up next. So stick around. We'll do some commercials, and we'll be back with the wonderful Miss Nina. So stick around.